welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. My name is Jay Dostal, author of the book Own Your Epic, Leadership Lessons in Owning Your Voice and Your Story. In this podcast, I highlight the stories and voices of educators across the country who are making a difference in schools and uncover what makes them exceptional leaders in their field. By sharing the voices and stories of others, we can all learn to appreciate that each of us is the author of our own epic and our experiences are relatable to others, if we are willing to share them. Let's get started on the Own Your Epic process. Welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. I am so excited to have our guest on the show today. It's been a long time coming. I can't believe that we have waited till season 2 of this to come on, but he's a busy guy. We've stayed in contact, but I'm just glad I actually get to sit down with him. This is the first time I get to see him in about 2 months. So, but I'm not going to introduce him. He's going to introduce himself. So why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Dr. Darrin Peppard. Man, what I do, I'm a recovering high school principal. That's what I do. Right now, Jay, as you know, obviously with Road to Awesome, the work that I'm doing now is just all about inspiring and growing leaders, whether that's in a speaker space, whether that's in a leadership coaching and consulting space, or obviously in the publishing space. It's just about lifting people up and helping people be the best version of themselves. And after 26 years in public education, now I get to do this. And like you were saying just before we hit the record button, man, I've been all over the place over the last couple months, and honestly, that's just kind of the warm-up. It's just going to get crazier and crazier from here. But what I do is I just help leaders find clarity. I help leaders walk in their purpose and find some joy in the job that they do.
And everybody needs that right now.
Absolutely.
And so I didn't even send you a list of questions that I ask, which I normally have a script, because
I would have ignored them.
You would have ignored it, and we would have gotten so far off base, which we're going to go on this next question. But let's talk about the beginning, because I think that as I talk about in my book about the intersections of our life and the different connections that we've made, and I know you just came back from Jostens Renaissance and that sort of thing, but can you talk a little bit about just your journey and the intersections of your career and the people that you've met and how that has impacted you overall and how it got you to this point? I mean, you and I met at Principal of the Year conference and just happened to be the same weekend Nebraska was playing Wyoming, and you were in Wyoming, and we just hit it off. And I think everybody got annoyed with us because that's all we were talking about. Yeah. Well, we had a great time. Our intersections crossed, and we've been friends ever since. But you just have a mind for that, and I listened to your podcast and all that. But talk a little bit about what that has meant to you over the course of your career.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you're not quite doing it justice, the story of when we met. So your listening audience has to know this part. So Wyoming and Nebraska don't play very often in football. Obviously, Nebraska's in the Big 12, Wyoming in the Mountain West. And that particular season, I think it was very, very early in the current era of Wyoming football. They weren't very good, and kind of in the tail end of when Nebraska was really strong. I'm sure you're hopeful with a new coach hire this year. But let's just say, folks, Wyoming got taken to the woodshed. And I walked in wearing my Wyoming polo, you in your Nebraska gear. And I don't get a, hey, how you doing? A shake my hand. It's, wow, what a game, huh? Or something like that, And yeah, sure, I'm going to like this guy.
Of course, your wife is with you and my wife is with me.
That's probably what kept it tame. But no, I think that's a great question. And I think, when we talk about those intersections, as you put it, man, there's so many different interactions and moments as you go through the course of your career, the course of your life, that you have those individuals that cross your path, or that tap you on the shoulder, that help shape you into the person that you are. I heard it this last weekend. A good friend and fellow Road to Awesome author, Dr. Farah Ortega Choate, was inducted into the Renaissance Hall of Fame, and she said in a speech that she gave this past weekend. She said, surround yourself with people who want for you, not people who want from you. And, I think I've worked really hard in the course of my life to be somebody who wants for others and not from others. I'm sure I've had my moments. I'm not perfect or anything like that. But when she said that, it took me back to like the very beginning of my education journey. And I was hired in Kingman, Arizona at Kingman Junior High School as a middle school science teacher, football coach, basketball coach. And my first principal, Betsy Parker, I've talked about her on my show probably 7 or 8 different times. One of the best mentors I've ever had in my life. But in my second year, there was a conversation in the summer where it was kind of that tap on the shoulder. And, you really ought to think about going into leadership. And so when you talk about those intersection moments, that's one that really stands out. Meeting my leadership coach, that was a huge moment. The intersection of our lives right there. I mean, it took me from a guy who was really a struggling first year principal to a guy who somehow, lands, in the room with all the other amazing 2016 principals of the year, yourself included. And I mean, man, you go back and look at the roster of principals who were there that year.
Oh, I mean, it's up on the wall.
Yeah,
right
I can
now.
See the picture from here.
It's crazy because Bill Ziegler, who was at the same conference, he's working for
Pennsylvania.
Working out of Apple now. He came by. We were doing Apple Distinguished Schools. Westside hadn't been on for a while, and he pulled in. I'm like, Bill? He's like, Jay? Yeah, it's crazy how those connections work. And I mean, I even through you and your social media platform, people I've never met personally, but I've connected with. I think of Bradley Skinner, and I think of Kip Schubert, and just these people that I've engaged in professionally through you. And I think that's a valid point to say, wanting for somebody else rather than wanting from, because at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about how you surrounded and how they build you up to make you better people. And so I consider you one of those people for me, and I think that's just so fascinating. And that's why when I watch you and you go out on your speaking engagements, I can see that coming back, because even when I came back to Nebraska, one of my colleagues from before you're working with now, and Jason Ryan, and it's just like, oh my gosh, everything just kind of comes together on that. Do you ever catch yourself like amazed and just like awestruck at how much you've been able to connect with people?
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Again, you mentioned I was at Jocelyn's Renaissance, and we're getting ready the middle part of the day. The second day they do basically a giant academic pep rally. 1,700 people just absolutely going nuts. And our closing keynote speaker is Dr. Joe Sanfilippo, and he was already there, and he's just standing outside of there. Joe and I've never met in person. We've been connected for a long time. And I was having a conversation with someone else, and I looked over, and he looked, and he just like walked out of his conversation to come over and shake my hand. And it was great to meet him in person. And yeah, that's one of those moments where I'm like, wow, I've been watching Joe walk to work for I don't know how long, with his 1-minute walks to work. And but he initiated that conversation coming over to me, and that was one of those moments where I was like, wow, that's that's pretty cool.
What's crazy about him is he actually came and spoke at the Nebraska Council of School Administrators years and years ago, and I was a fanboy. I remember reading his stuff, seeing his 1-minute walks to school, and I came up. I actually caught him on his way out of the bathroom. I was walking, and he was like, hey, how's it going? We struck up a conversation, but then it wasn't until I got published through you, and I'm working on praise pieces that I reach out to him, and he remembers me. And the same with Jimmy Casas, and I'm like, how did I get in this realm where these people who I view as like leadership rock stars actually know who I am? Because I don't feel like I'm in that same category. And with you and your travels around the country, I mean, if I was walking a mile in your shoes, I'd be like, how did I get to this point? It's
Well, I think a part of it is I don't really feel like at any moment in time, whether it's standing on a big stage at a conference, working with a leader one-on-one, it's not like, oh, look at me, I've arrived. I mean, there's none of that. I think it's about the journey and just enjoying moments on the journey. Now, yes, you are correct. There are definitely times where you just, you got to kind of step up on the balcony and just kind of look around and maybe look back. You don't spend forever in the rearview mirror, but you do occasionally. It's worthwhile to look in the rearview mirror and think, man, look at how far I've come from this rookie teacher in Arizona, in 1995 to now, doing what I'm blessed to get to do.
Does that imposter syndrome ever sneak into you?
Oh, good God, yes, it does. Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned two of the greats, both Joe and Jimmy are, they're kind of on that Mount Rushmore, up there with maybe like a Todd Whitaker or
like a Reeves,
Douglas Reeves, and, Tom Murray. I mean, those folks. So, to think, that I'm, running in a space with those guys is a little bit odd. But I also remind myself all the time, and there are others. You mentioned Kip Schubert. Kip is somebody who's wanting to find his way into this speaking space, and he's he's doing some good work there. But I remind him, and I remind myself all the time, to never compare someone's beginning or someone's middle to your beginning. I'm not trying to be Joe. I'm not trying to be Jimmy. I'm not trying to be Tom Murray, any of those guys. I'm just trying to be the best version of myself every day. And you've alluded to it, but I want to come back to it. One of the most important things, I think, for me to be the best person that I can be is to be that connector. And the more people that I can connect, the work that I do, I love to go in and work in schools and work with leadership teams and coach leaders and full teams and, obviously do the publishing work, but I can't solve everybody's problems. But because of the relationships that I continue to build, I know who can. I had a conversation with somebody here really recently, and we were talking about, their biggest challenge, something I ask people all the time, tell me what's the biggest challenge you're dealing with right now? In their case, really big transition in their demographics. And so now that need for more support with English language learners. Jay, that's not my wheelhouse. I mean, they could have also said, we need somebody to really help us understand our data. Still not my wheelhouse, right? But in this particular case, they're like, hey, this is what we're looking for. I would tell you the best person in the country, a lady named Andrea Bittner in Pennsylvania. Because Andrea and I are connected, I can make that connection. I mean, it's not work for me. It's just, hey, you need something. I know the right person. Let me point you in the right direction. And I think the more that we do that with each other, the more we support each other. Again, that's wanting for someone. That's not wanting from someone. Andrea would never ask me, hey, on purpose, hey, make sure you're talking to people about me. No, I'm not, she would never ask that of me. But I'll tell you what, I talk about her, or hey, maybe you need somebody in the mental health space. I'm going to tell you, go right to Charlie Peck. That's the person you need to go to. Charlie and I built a relationship. She's a rock star. That's who you should go to. Charlie would never ask that of me, but I do it. But I know they're also doing it for me, even though I don't ask for it.
Right, and so I mean that's kind of another. So we had our first intersection, and we maintained that friendship and that that relationship over time. But then our paths crossed again when I wrote Own Your Epic, and I was I was seeking out somebody to do publishing, and we talked a little bit about that process. And I think one of the things what you're saying is, I mean, for the listeners out there, is totally true, because when I'm trying to put this manuscript together, you're telling me you need to go to X, Y, and Z and look at their work and see what they did, because there's some cross-referencing on there. So I wanted to kind of take that back then to one of the questions that I talk to a lot of people about is about the notion of teachers leaving the profession, educators leaving the profession versus not having the pipeline of people coming back in. Yeah. And as someone who, I don't even say that you left the profession, because you're just doing it in a different fashion.
Yeah.
As you have been going around the country and talking to leaders with teachers, what advice are you giving them about those that are maybe thinking about leaving, and what's that advice that you give people who maybe are struggling in a different pathway but maybe considering education? Like, why would it be a good thing to come into?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And right now, we're struggling with being able to hire and retain quality teachers, but it isn't just that. We're struggling to hire and retain quality leaders. And you talk about the pipeline. I mean, the leadership pipeline, it isn't empty, but people are moving through it faster than they ever have.
Yeah.
I mean, so many of the leaders that I work with now, they didn't have 7, 8, 9 years of assistant principal or department head or any of those kinds of things. It was, I was in the classroom 3 years, and now these opportunities are there and I'm leaping on them, which, good for them. But you and I both know there's a lot of learning that is, well, ideal, not necessary, but ideal before you jump into that principal spot. And but anyway, good question as far as what am I talking to people about? And I would say this: I hear frequently from people that they just feel like they're just burned out. And what I tell people all the time about burnout is you can't be burned out if you weren't ever on fire. And the key is going back and figuring out or remembering what it was that set you on fire in the first place. And maybe a little bit of a tangent on there, but I look back to when I went to college, I majored in physical therapy. I wanted to be a high school athletic trainer. That didn't work out. I didn't go to class. I got really good at playing pool, though. I mean, I was like 8 and 9 ball champion galore. But I learned some things along the way, and changed major a couple of times. Just couldn't find that thing. And somebody asked me to help them coach a 5th grade girls basketball team, and I was hooked. It was like, this was my spark. That's what started my fire. And for me, that tail end of my time as a superintendent, I was probably burned out too. You can only shield your people so long. You can only defend them so long. You can only continue to do the work in such a challenging time for so long before you do start to feel a little bit burned out. So I had to get reconnected with what is the thing that really stokes my fire. And man, when my last few years, you'll get this really well because you're one of the very best at this. As a high school principal, being able to grow your leaders around you, your APs, your ADs, your lead teachers, your department heads, man, that is just what fans my flame. And so, when I made my transition, it wasn't, I'm done with education. It was, I can do a lot more to support education across the board, across the entire country, if I get out and help those young leaders, those ones who are flying through that leadership pipeline. The more I can do to help them, learn from the mistakes I made, or even some of the things that I did right, that really stoked my fire. So what I tell people is, you've got to get reconnected with whatever it is that that fans that flame for you.
Yeah. And it looks different, because I know you and I have had this conversation. So when we met in 2016, I was in my 6th year as a principal, and here I am in 2023, and I'm still a principal, albeit in a different school, different setting, and that sort of thing. And so, because I remember when you were leaving the principalship to go to a superintendent, we had this conversation, and every time we have these conversations, I'm like, well, man, maybe I should be doing that. And you get into that whole thing of you're comparing yourself to others, and then I expressed to you that what I like the challenge of the high school principalship, and I'm fairly young as a high school principal, and so that challenge is right there in front of me, and so that's what keeps on fanning my flame. And then I look at you and I see you traveling all over the place, and I'm like, well, gosh, that looks pretty good too. And I know you put a lot of hard work and effort into that. So anybody who's out there who is thinking that that's just a cakewalk, you got another thing coming. I've seen how fried Darrin has gotten.
I probably work harder now than I did as superintendent.
But it's crazy how just that reflection, that ongoing reflection of what is what your passion is, and how do you create that? Again, tying it back to this podcast, how do you create that story that is written by you and that you're telling? And I think every time you get up on stage, every time you do a podcast, you're telling your story, and it's just amplifying your voice, and it's gathering more people. And I think there was a portion in the book where you're talking about be a fisher of men. And how many people are you going to go out and catch and get into your net, because that's the impact of your story. And so, what there's that in the Garth Brooks song says the most important thing is the dash in between the 2 years on your gravestone.
Yeah.
What do you want your dash to say about you?
Oh man, that's a phenomenal question. I love that. And by the way, great job setting up that question. I mean, that was there's a reason.
I've gotten better at this.
Yeah, there's a reason that you waited until the middle of season 2 before you had me on, right? Yeah, you set that one up well. I think if it comes down to it, what the dash is would be that I made an impact on others, allowing them to make an impact on others. I mean, I'm not necessarily worried about, that me being the direct impact on, on kids, on teachers, on leaders. But if I can help the person I'm working with make that impact, it's almost kind of like, like paying it forward. I know that during the course of my, direct 26 years in public education that I made some direct impact. And I know that I continue to do that now, but I think it's more about leaving a legacy in others. I think about, back to what you opened with those intersections. And I think about, I mentioned Betsy, but there's 3 or 4 others. I mentioned Tom, that coming to an intersection with them and meeting them left such an impact on me, and I know that impact got paid forward directly because I had that intersection with them. And so if at some point down the road there are others who are impacted because of the impact I made on someone else, that's what it's really all about, right? It's almost like in athletics all the time they talk about the coaching tree, that all these different coaches that are, from the Bill Walsh coaching tree, or
Nick Saban
coaching tree, or what have you. I mean, on and on and on. And, they aren't directly there, but boy, they're not far away from that. And the core of who they were, the values that they lived with, lived on in those other people. And I think, man, if that's what the dash is, that's a pretty great impact.
Who are your biggest influences?
Oh, my wife, first and foremost. She keeps me grounded. She keeps me, sane. But I'll tell you what, a couple years ago, we made this decision to just jump full time into what we do. For those who don't know, my wife Jess runs the publishing side of the business. It's all her. So we both,
great editor, by the way.
She's
great
fantastic. Editor. She really is. There's a reason it's her and not me. When we made this decision to leap from both of our full-time jobs, this wasn't one, this was both. Man, there was some trepidation on my part, but she has never wavered, never once had any question that what we were doing was the right work, and that this was not only going to work out, but be something that's impactful and is more than just a, hey, we're self-employed, but that, we can truly make this big impact. So without question, she is probably the biggest influence on me. I have some pretty good friends that I lean into pretty heavy, not just in this space, but just in life, that make a big difference. I probably won't list all of them because otherwise I'll forget some of them.
Of course,
but
yeah.
Interestingly, I'll talk a little bit about Eric Lillis, and I know you've connected a little bit with Eric. Eric and I have a similar how we met story to you and I.
Okay.
Eric is an Iowa guy. Of course, Jay and I are sitting here in Omaha, directly across the river from Iowa, which, by the way, I root for the Hawkeyes. I don't root for the Cornhuskers. Sorry, Jay.
I'm a Loper fan, man.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. I'm a Loper
fan.
fan.
There you go. It's all good. But I was going somewhere with this. Oh, so Eric and I actually met on New Teacher Day in 1995. We're both brand new teachers in Kingman, Arizona, where he is now the executive director of Kingman Academy Charter School.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But we were both brand new teachers in Kingman, Arizona. He was an elementary PE teacher. I was a middle school science teacher. Same deal, Jay. I walk in wearing a Wyoming polo. He's wearing an Iowa polo. A handful of years prior, Iowa had beaten Wyoming on a last-second field goal, by the way, in the Holiday Bowl. One of the best bowl games that you probably could have seen at the time. And same thing. I walk in and not a hi, not a hello, doesn't get up and shake my hand. He says, "Nice Holiday Bowl." And I'm like, wow, I'm really gonna like this guy. And we are still to this day, like 28 years later, we're best friends. And he has been an incredible influence on me in so many different ways. And I think he would probably say the same of me, but just, all the way through like the challenge of the pandemic, he was the one I was on the phone with, hey, you got to help me through this. And he was doing the same for me. When I was a principal, I moved from being an assistant principal to being a principal in the same building. So domino
which is
effect,
another
right?
story in itself.
Yeah, it is. That's a whole separate episode.
That might be a whole podcast in and of itself.
It is, man. I'll tell you what. Yeah, 40 feet down the hallway. Should have been 400 miles. But when I took that job, of course, then that opened an assistant principal spot. And the first call I made was to Eric. I'm like, hey, I don't know if you want to move to Wyoming or not, but I really need you on my team. And he did. He moved up there for 2 years and was an assistant principal and athletic director for me. Did a fantastic job. But just, through the course of our life, I mean, that's another one, that intersection, maybe not the nice Holiday Bowl day, but, a few days further down the road, that's one that has made a difference in me, because he's somebody that, still to this day, when I, hey, what are you struggling with? What are the challenges? He's the first to share with me, hey, here's something you should think about, here's wow. That kind of thing. And again, there's tons of them, but I'll just probably roll with those two for right now.
So talk to me a little bit about curating and cultivating your story so you can amplify your voice. And I know you've got the publishing, you've got the speaking engagements, you've got your podcast, you've got all of these different things to amplify your voice, your story. What's the best advice that you can give to others who maybe aren't wired like you and I to write blogs or write books or do podcasts, but what's the best advice you got for them to share their voice and their story and why it's important?
Well, I think first and foremost, you got to be clear about what you value. That's true, as a building level principal. You better be clear about what you care about, what you expect, what you're going to be looking for. And the same thing is true, when you're going to tell your story. What do you really care about? Don't try to, replicate what somebody else is doing. Don't create another 1 minute walk to work. That's Joe's thing. Okay, even though he's not going to be doing it anymore. That's, find what really fits who you are and what you care about, and then show up. And you don't have to show up every single week or every single day. I mean, don't try to match my media calendar. Good God, I can't match my media calendar. I mean, one podcast a week, plus usually a mid-month release and a blog every week, and on with social media. And it's not about the frequency, it's about the consistency. So whatever your message is, just work on getting clear about it. We have a brand new author with Road Dawson, several, but one that jumps to mind, a superintendent by the name of Brandy Kelly. And Brandy's thing is all about lead with hope, and hope is an acronym. And what we've told Brandy, I mean, it's going to be a good year before her book's released, but in the meantime, you need to really lean into what hope really means and help people get some clarity around that, and just show up on a regular basis. Whether that's jumping on a Twitter chat or posting something once a month on your social media, just one. Maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's Insta, whatever. Threads. By the way, I'm on Threads now. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm on Threads now. Yeah, it's the same thing, just with a different logo. But whatever it is, just show up consistently. Wow. I think that's, man, if you want to build, that following, and that's not the right word, because following that doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Right.
How many people are following you? Don't get caught up in that. It's the same thing I tell people who speak, like in conferences and that kind of stuff. Don't worry about how many people you have in the room. Make sure you have the right people in the room. If it's 5 people, that's fine.
And
that's
take
all
advantage of the time that you have with
them. Exactly. Yeah, and make an impact with them. So, yeah, you don't have to show up every single day. You don't have to, try to come up with something that is just brilliant. Man, when I wrote the first version of Road to Awesome, man, I thought it had to be like this magic formula for leadership, and oh my God, I struggled with it so much. And somebody finally just told me, it was our mutual friend, PC, Dr. Phil Campbell. He said, Darrin, just tell your stories. And so I'll pay that piece of advice forward as well. When you're thinking about how am I going to show up on whatever consistent, tell your stories. Just tell your stories, because that's what hooks people. They want to hear, like, the human connection. They want to know, what have you been doing, or what are you doing to impact lives? Don't think you have to have some magic formula, because if there was a magic formula in leadership, we'd have already discovered, right? Yeah.
So. Well, I think you bring up a good point here about, because it isn't about the followers. It isn't about you personally. It's about the lasting impact that you want to leave on others. And so when you talk about telling your story, and like, you might think that you're not a very good storyteller at all. It doesn't matter. If people can find themselves in a story that you're telling and can relate to it, that's the basis of connection. And to be honest with you, I think it's a lot about what is missing in today is there's not enough listening to other people's stories to see, oh, we have more in common than bald heads and school administrators. We've got a whole bunch of things in common. And so where can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Darrin M. Peppard on all of the social media platforms. I've made it real simple. The website is roadtoawesome.net. Those are the 2 easiest places to find me. If you want to check out the podcast, it's Leaning Into Leadership. It's on every platform, I think. Pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
On every platform. And just go to the website, or hit me on social media. Every page on the website has a contact us, so just click on that, or like I said, just hit me on social media. So I'm always around.
That's awesome, man. I can't believe that we have waited 2 seasons to finally say, partially was scheduling faux pas on both of our parts, but
that's true.
Dude, this has been awesome. I wanted you like on one of the first episodes, but I'll take second seasons, because you are you're a humble person. I know this about you. You're not going to say it about yourself, so I get to say it for you at the end of the podcast. But you're inspiring, man. I've come to you on multiple occasions. Appreciate everything that you have poured into me. I feel like I'm a better leader because of the advice that you provided. We caught up at an ASCD conference when I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and just had a chat about those things. Yeah. And so, I am thankful for our intersections crossing. So I appreciate you being on the podcast. Head on over to the website, ownyourepic.blogspot.com. Check out the previous podcasts, and hey, pick up a copy of the book. And so we will see you next time on the Own Your Epic podcast. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. To find out more about Own Your Epic, check out my website at ownyourepic.blogspot.com, where you can purchase my book or subscribe to all the latest blog and podcast updates. Until next time, Own your epic and share your voice and your story. It matters and can make a difference in the lives of others.